And we should be live now. All right. Well, this is the first episode of the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I greatly appreciate everybody tuning in. This is going to be, I think, a fairly decent undertaking, but it's something that my heart's really in. So welcome everybody for tuning in, coming over here, especially people from the Centerline Systems podcast and everybody who's followed me with Mark over there. It's been really great, and I hope that there's more and more people as time goes on to come on in and let their voices be heard and be able to talk about things in a liberty-oriented perspective. A couple housekeeping things here. The schedule that I'm planning to go with is going to be every Saturday at the same time. It's going to be at 1700. And currently right now it's 1700 Central Daylight Time, or commie time as I call it. So that's going to be my tentative plan. I may or may not add extra days as time goes on, but I'm going to try and see if I can keep the consistency with this as it is right now. And so one other thing that I also want to point out is, aside from here, I will be, and I have been participating over at Centerline Systems on their videos, kind of filling in wherever Mark needs me over there, usually in the Cialis After Dark, which is coming up next week. I will be on there next Thursday, and we're going to have a great conversation there. But Mark also does some other content as well on Mondays. So go over there, check him out, give him some love, and also stop into his online store. Check out the gear he makes. It's made in America. Guy's a super good dude. He makes quality gear. I can say that from the perspective of, I actually have his stuff. I've used his stuff, and I can tell you for a fact that it works great. He hasn't paid me to say any of this. I just genuinely like really good gear, and Mark's a good guy. So go support him. Beyond that, like I said, welcome. Please, if you like everything that you see, like and subscribe. Throw some comments down in the comment section. And without further ado, I'm going to get into introducing my guest this evening, Sean Kennedy. He's the chair of the American Liberty Caucus. He's a really good dude. And I will yield the floor to him to kind of give you or allow him to give you an introduction. So, Sean, please take it away.
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you. So I'm Sean Kennedy. I'm the chair of the American Liberty Caucus. We are a liberty-oriented group. We focus primarily on the outskirts of the Libertarian Party with constitutionalists, minarchists, trying to bring them in, trying to expose people more to that version of liberty that we tend to agree with, we want to push. And we're building out that organization countrywide. So we're picking up state reps. We're growing that. We're hosting tables at different libertarian events, liberty events in general. So it's been awesome. I'm also the comms director in Massachusetts for the Libertarian Party. And I am a new candidate for my local town council in town. So got a lot of irons in the fire, but I'm super happy to be here, man. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's awesome. If I lived in your town, just knowing what I know about you and your disposition for policy, I think you are definitely a worthy candidate, and hopefully you get a lot of momentum for the position you're going for. So I wish you all the best in that endeavor, truly. So I think it's awesome because we need a lot more people to get involved, not just in spreading liberty and having conversations that are meaningful, but also running for positions, especially at the local level, where I personally feel they have a great impact and really can affect things for us. And that kind of brings
local. Your biggest impact by far is what you can do locally. It's what you can do in your towns and your cities, how you can affect your taxes, your ordinances, everything. It's local, and we need as many people as we can stepping up as much as possible and getting into those roles for sure.
100%. And that's actually a great kind of punting point to where that's kind of what tonight's going to be around to some degree. Is we're going to talk about the what is liberty. We're going to talk about property rights, property tax, self-defense, defend the guard, which is a big thing that I know Sean and many of the team are working at over at the American Liberty Caucus. It's been a really big passion project for everybody there, and I think it deserves a lot of attention. So we have a lot of good subjects to run down, and we may talk about a few current events in the news that, kind of, I don't know, kind of made me some kind of way this week. And I know Sean knows what I'm talking about, but we'll see where we get with the main topics here. So Sean, a lot of people, I think there's a really good conversation with people about what liberty is, but what really is it? Like, what is the definition for it? Because I think I know what the definition is, but if you want to kind of prime us on that conversation and take it in the way that you think it should go.
So I think a lot of people view it as a very as just a concept where you are able to live your life and the government leaves you alone and you can say whatever you want, and you can own your guns, and it's a very 3,000 foot perspective over what liberty really means. But I think when you really get into the nitty gritty of it, it's you have the right to own your property, you have the right to own yourself, and you have the right to not have anyone aggress upon you. So if you start there, you can build up from that as a very solid foundation, and everything can bloom off of that concept entirely. So you have the ability to own your home and do whatever you want to your home, your property. I was speaking to people today about this specifically, business owners, that they have to go to the town hall and they got to go through all these different committees and all this stuff. And I'm like, you guys should just be able to do what you want on your property as long as you're not aggressing on anyone else's property. You're not polluting the water supply or something along those lines that affects other people outside of your space. But you own your stuff. You should be able to do what you want with your stuff, and the government shouldn't be able to come in and take your stuff away without any notice, without any reason. And you should be able to speak freely, and there are social consequences to speaking freely, but there should be no government level consequences.
Sure.
They shouldn't be able to come down on you for speaking out against authority figures. The government, our system of government is supposed to be run by the people first, and the legislative body does what the people does, the bidding of the people. We cannot let that allowed to be reversed, and we need to everything blooms off of that really solid foundation of your property rights, essentially, which is what the root of libertarian comes from, is that, and what we call the NAP, which is the non-aggression principle. Those are the pillar concepts, really, and you can build your freedom off of that. And fortunately, our country is actually founded kind of on those systems already, so it's very easy to transfer the libertarian ideological views into people who believe in constitutional values, believe in our country, our founding, and why we even exist as a nation.
Yeah, no, I think that was actually really well said, especially not just in summary to kind of what libertarians are about and kind of our disposition on things, but I think in what the general intent was from the founders. I think if you were to ask them today, things are vastly different from where they had intended them to be, and it's not even by a close margin. It's very much departed. Not only in how we handle things domestically, but in our foreign affairs and how we deal with other nations, and so many different things. And one thing I want to bring up too is, the realm of liberty, while it's a very widespread and recognized concept that we see a lot as Americans, it's actually not relegated simply just to America. It's a kind of a concept that spreads across to everybody. And I think what we're seeing too, just to briefly hit on something across the pond a little bit, is you're starting to see, I think, people kind of wake up to that idea of like, oh man, like they're not good. We're being deprived of our liberty, deprived of our rights. And I think there is a subtle awakening, but I think, as with anything meaningful, it's always going to take a little extra time. And usually in the course of that time, it hurts, because people, I don't remember who it is that said this, but we are willing to endure a lot of injury essentially before we actually change anything. And, and so I think it's not a uniquely American thing, but I think it's something shared around the world by a lot of people. I'm hopeful for the future that not only do we see it really take off here in more of a manner that it is, but I hope we see it in places like Europe, in places like South America, and all over. So, what are your thoughts on something like that too? I mean, do you see that as being a potential outcome, or do you think it's still got to kind of fester a little bit?
So I do think that they are reaching a boiling point. I think
Mm-hmm.
what you have in Europe that would be different than America is we have kind of a propagandized melting pot concept in
Mm,
America that doesn't occur in Europe. Those are
yeah.
the foundational countries that the original stock for America came from.
Mm-hmm.
There's longstanding heritages, national preferences, languages that are specific to regions. It is very unique over there compared to us.
Yeah.
It might not be unique globally. Globally, that's common actually, but in
Sure.
America, that's not quite the case. So I think you're right. You cannot have you can have a level of comfort, and
Mm-hmm.
the elites essentially will take advantage of that level of comfort because they can kind of get away and chip away slowly. But you do have a tipping point, and I'm hoping it's reaching the tipping point because it exposes some other things that we have in this country that are also being eroded. Freedom of
Yeah.
speech stuff is starting to be that's the biggest challenge in my opinion. It's your freedom of speech
Sure.
in America that gets eroded, and we have a major problem. A lot of people like to assume that we're just free because we're a democracy, even
Right.
though, as you know very well, we're a representative republic.
Mm-hmm.
So in Europe, it's the same kind of concept where everyone believes they have this freedom of democracy, and yet the government is censoring speech. And honestly, in the EU and in the UK, I mean, excuse me, they're censoring just thought on the sidewalk. You can't pray within a certain distance from an abortion clinic. If you're caught basically standing still with your eyes closed, they're going to arrest you, which is absolutely insane. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that you have different groups coming together, coalitioning over there, and supporting, freedom movements over there as well. Whether or not it's libertarian is irrelevant. They need to be free, and they need to be
Yeah.
free on their own terms and their own cultures and their own societies, and they need to support themselves. And they are 100% being attacked from different angles. And I do hope that they're able to turn this around because it's very disheartening to see. And they're behind us in some areas and ahead of us in others. And we got to make sure that, we maintain we're the pinnacle of freedom in the
Sure.
world, and we maintain that line. And it really, in my opinion, stops with us. The second we lose, everyone else is done.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I kind of like where you went, with some of the differences between the United States and Europe, because I mean, while we came from that stock at the same time, like you said, there's very long-standing traditions, there's long-standing heritage, there's long-standing culture that I think is it's fundamental to who they are as a people, and it's unique to each country. And well, one could say, a lot of the countries, are either Germanic in origin or Slavic in origin. I still think it's the same thing to where there's this uniqueness that makes each of these peoples unique. But, I think you can also work in liberty, a lot more liberty, using that uniqueness and not eroding it. It's, I agree with you. Like the concept or utilizing the term libertarian might not be what they call it over there, and that's fine, because I think very much like you said, the whole goal is to enhance and definitely expand liberty in general. There's a couple things that I want to just pop up here, a couple comments that I thought were kind of cool. My buddy Mark at Centerline Systems, he really digs you. He's a cigar guy too, and he's a big fan of Liberty. So you get big props already from him.
This alone in my state is expressing freedom. That's how bad it is in Massachusetts.
Yeah. Well, hopefully one day, and hopefully if you get into one of the meaningful positions that you've looked at, hopefully Liberty can expand a little bit even more beyond those borders.
I would love it.
Yeah. So there's actually a gentleman who is from across the pond in the UK. Gene from across the pond. He brings up a couple decent comments here. in the UK, it's always those which are against control or overreach are the ones on the side of freedom and liberty. A few people have now woken up after the lies of the plague and censored speech. And then he later goes on to state, sooner or later, the people will rise up, just like in V for Vendetta, hopefully create a better place to live. 1984 was a storybook, not a guidebook to follow. And I've read 1984. I actually read that growing up. I think it was in middle school. It was some heavy stuff for a middle schooler, but yeah, I mean, I do get the sense that when you look at what 2020 was, when you look at how things eroded since 2020 and all of just the arbitrary measures, it really ushered in a situation to where I think it was kind of like this point to where they're like, okay, how far can we go and what are they willing to accept? And then once they saw, how far they could go, they're like, all right, well, let's see if we can do it a little more and do it a little more. And I think it did get to a breaking point where people were like, no, absolutely not. And, not to get too far, departed from the conversation, but after all of the events of 2020, 2021, 22 came, and then you had the escalation of the Ukraine war, which had been going on at the time for quite a while, and then 2022 came around, and then you really started to see kind of this overwhelming pouring on of this idea of like, oh, well, we have to support them, and if you don't support them, then you're this, or whatever the case is. And so it's like, at least in the United States, we kind of got some reprieve, and it's not as poured on. But like over in the EU, in all the countries, and the UK notwithstanding that, or the UK not being an exception, it really seems like they're just kind of not only being propagandized into the ground, but they're pretty much like being forced. Like, you will, you will agree to this, and you will do this, and God forbid, you make a meme or whatever the case is. And so I really do hope, for Gene's country and many other countries in Europe, that there really is this growing fostering movement. And I think there is. And before I turn it over to you, one of the most popular definitions I've heard of liberty is freedom with morality, and that the idea of complete freedom is absolute chaos. But which is why I think the founders alluded more often to the term liberty, because they did believe that there was some inherent responsibility or moral component to freedom. And so with that, kind of rounding off this portion of the discussion, what are your thoughts on the whole Europe situation, the escalation of things, and even the United States, if you want to add into that and whatnot? So
yeah, I think there's so many directions to go on that.
I know.
I think I think so. To take the U.S. situation with Ukraine, I take the opinion, and I am no Russian apologist on this. I do take the opinion that we have a country we had a Cold War with. The Cold War fizzled out. We seemed to win that. Democracy was spread in the style of the U.S. across Europe, and then Europe essentially has developed its own federation of states. They're no longer necessarily independent. The EU was supposed to be an agreement for trade, and it has turned into more of a federation. And they've tried to use this to economically pressure specific EU countries who were trying to maintain a level of independence, like Poland and Georgia.
Sure.
So I think when it comes to Ukraine, I don't agree with Russia invading another sovereign country, but I also don't think it's appropriate to completely ignore the fact that their red line was missiles in Ukraine from NATO or the U.S. And the second that seemed to be the way we were going, or the Ukraine's entrance into NATO, that they did what they did. It's a red line. And you know what? Anyone that doesn't agree with that I honestly believe is a hypocrite, because we already went through this with Cuba.
Yeah.
They had missiles in Cuba. We flipped out over it.
Yeah.
Rightly so. We own the Western Hemisphere. It's ours. That is the way it works. And
Mhm.
we aren't going to be challenged over that anytime soon. And I don't have a problem with a state the size and the military capabilities and the technological capabilities of Russia, even though I don't really think they match ours, but I think they need to be respected. And instead
Yeah.
of respecting them as a trade partner, we're aggressing against them in a land grab for fertile soil in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And outside of all of Ukraine's other horrific human rights aggressions that they commit over there that we're supposed to completely ignore,
Yeah.
like,
Often,
it's
yeah.
not like it's a peaceful little state over there. It's
Yeah.
the central hub of all kinds of bad stuff in Europe. It really
Yeah.
is. So I hope that other states start to wake up. I'm really disheartened with the fact that some EU countries want this war to continue. They think that
Yeah.
wearing down Russia is a successful option. And, they, for some reason, ignore the fact that they're our biggest trade partner, as far as I'm aware of, is China. So Russia borders China too. It's not like that, they're not necessarily friends. They're more
Mhm.
allies out of necessity.
Yeah.
And they're going to be able to get what they need in their own continent. It's the biggest one in the world.
Oh,
So,
for sure.
like, it's kind of asinine to try to attack them and continue this thing and think that we're going to somehow win out. You crossed the red line. It has been going on forever. It also appears to be a money laundering scheme for the elites and the oligarchs over there.
Mhm.
Billions of dollars have gone missing, totally unaccounted for, and
Yeah.
we're kind of using it as a military testing ground.
Yeah.
And the cost of life for that is kind of disgusting. So there's a lot of stuff wrapped up in Ukraine that I find extremely problematic. And you touched on the freedom with morality aspect of it, and this is a bone that I have with the Libertarian Party in general.
Mhm.
Is it doesn't work. You can't promote freedom. Freedom is freedom of tyrannical government. It's
Mm.
not the freedom to do whatever you want with no consequences.
Mm.
And I call what a sect of the Libertarian Party finds itself in, and as well as a huge part of the Democrats now, is this level of unchecked hedonism in society.
Yeah.
Like we go against this level of morality that the West is founded on, and we're going to throw that out the window and allow everybody to do whatever they want, and we're going to assume that it's somehow going to go all right.
Sure.
The foundation there is founded in Christian moral ethics, and among other things, and there's a reason for it. It's because it's successful. That's how we
Yeah.
got where we are. And a turning around on that level of history and the success of that, and saying we're going to spit in the face of it and do all kinds of things that are super, unbelievably damaging to society, and expect
Right.
the outcome of this to be good is insane. It's complete insanity.
Yeah.
So I would agree with you. Like, there's still morals. There's still there's a level of social expectation, and ultimately the check on this really is the ability to not associate with people, like, at all, that you disagree with. And you need
Yeah.
a tribal check in society. You need those
Mhm.
groups and those sects of society who do believe in those more extreme hedonistic things that they want to do. They'll find themselves in their own places, and they can do it off and leave the rest of us alone. And that's ultimately what I want. Because otherwise, as we're seeing now, we're seeing, a pride parade that used to be just people walking down and trying to express their rights to marriage, which is a whole thing in and of itself.
Mhm.
Trying to get just an equal representation in the legal system, which I think that they are due because they're taxpayers, has
Sure.
turned into like a hedonism fest on the sidewalk in front of children and a few, and we can't have that in our society.
Right.
That doesn't work. And we should allow them a place to go and do it and go fail, and then
Mhm.
come back and go, well, it's a mess and we need help cleaning up. Like, that's
Yeah.
the only way to fix it. You have to have the cycle. Otherwise it just festers, and we're in this festering stage.
Mm.
I'm hoping the tide turns. I really am.
Yeah. And, and just to kind of like bow tie this, there's a couple points that I think you brought up that I want to hit on. And I think, going back briefly on the Ukraine war and just war in general. It has been said numerous times by several of our founding fathers and many bright people, even up to and including Ron Paul, and many of our contemporaries today. War is one of the most effective ways of usurping and destroying liberty, and it's not even just American liberty; it's the liberty of any people in any country. It's because you can compile and just throw on any excuse, and it doesn't even have to be a good one. We've seen that. I mean, there's excuses and examples that people have said, like, oh, like we have to do it because it's for national security, but then it's like you actually look at it and it's like, yeah, except it has nothing to do with that at all, and just going to the corruption aspect of it, which is invariably always going to be a thing. Follow the money. Where does the paper trail lead? All of these different things. And so, and I think that's why, the founders, especially when they looked at something like war, one, it was relegated to Congress specifically to declare war because it wasn't supposed to be a whimsical thing, because they knew the dangers that this would bring, especially as it pertained to people's liberty and rights. And so I think that's something that we really need to also try and foster. And I think that's also going to come up, later on in the show with Defend the Guard, because I think that acts as kind of a hedge against that. But, it's really, if we want to preserve a lot more liberty, especially in the United States, we really have to take a position of being so trepidatious about, the different potentialities of wars, how we go into wars. Is it legitimate? Is it not legitimate? And how we conduct ourselves in that manner, because it can be a very, very dangerous road to go down.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, and the other aspect too that I like that you brought up is, is like there, it's kind of like there is kind of a subset of people that do exist, whether it's libertarians or conservatives or whoever, Democrats especially, who are like, oh, like I have the right to do this, or this is my liberty to do this. And it's almost as if it becomes a punchline to say it's my right or it's my liberty, when in fact, you look at some of the things that are advocated for, and there's no way that you can possibly have a right without violating somebody else's rights, or without creating a situation that is either grossly inappropriate to the point to where it becomes criminal, right? Or there's some type of injury or whatever the case is. And so, I think part of that also lies within the realm of education. I think we've had a horrible erosion of education as far as our understanding of not only liberty and rights, but just the general foundation of our country. So you hit on a lot of different things, and I'm very happy you did, because it really is a broad subject. I mean, like you said, there's so many.
Totally agree. No, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
No,
but
please,
you said education, and this is a thing that I want people to wrap their brains around. We have a public school system, which is essentially a socialist system. And it's been completely infiltrated by a left-leaning ideological view, from colleges down to elementary school. Okay. You have that. That's a problem right there. There's a second problem where if you have the money to not put your children in that school, if you're wealthy and successful, you don't send your children to public school. You send them somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
They're getting a better education there. They're getting a better education in civics. They're getting a better education of how the world works, and they're making connections. If you are someone in that bubble, in that sphere above the rest of us, you are going to want your children to have every advantage, just like anybody would. You want your children to have the biggest advantage they can have over everyone else. So if nobody else understands what your rights are, what you can do, how to get involved civically, how bills are passed, how the government works, how you go into war, and why it's important to hold Congress as the sole accountable body that enters these wars and conflicts. They're able to siphon that and take advantage of the uneducated and it's devolved tremendously over 50 years now, and that's another component as to why we are where we are. And
Yeah.
it's unfortunately the school system's not going to do it, and it really falls on parents to teach their children these things and be involved themselves and set a good example. And don't assume that your children are going to be educated by the public school system. They might
Mm,
get the basics to get out and work a menial job as like a general manager of Chipotle, but that's
sure.
not what you're looking for. Like
Yeah.
you want your kids to be engaged and understand what's going
Right.
on and know how their money works and why their money is made up and not real, and like a whole slew of things. And like they're not going to get that. They're just
No.
not going to get it in our current system.
Yeah.
And I think it's
No.
by design. It might
Yeah.
not be totally intentional, but there's definitely a trickle down effect of this as that's happened. And we're doing a huge disservice to our kids.
Oh, absolutely. And I I put up a quote here, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I like what Tolstoy says because he kind of speaks to the whole realm of liberty and the foundation, whether it's the United States or Europe or wherever it is. You know, I think it's so true. Like it's like there's really just a huge push on forgetting culture, destroying our history, destroying our traditions, national heroes, which I do think to some degree, while people shouldn't be overwhelmingly just fawned over, I do think that significant figures are important because they, for good or ill, they do provide a sense of where the direction the country was going at the time, perhaps the need for rough men to do rough things, and times of strife and times of great great prosperity. And I do think he's right. Like if we forsake these things and if we turn away from these things, we are doomed to extinction, because invariably if you can go down this pathway of forgetting everything that you are as a people, you soon will cease to exist. Like you as people, may exist, but what you were is completely gone. And I think that's, you know, I, I I think that's a huge threat today. And I think when you look at some countries, and I'll put Poland in there to some degree, and I know a lot of people might be up in arms about this, but you look at Russia and you look at some of these other countries, and perhaps there's others that I haven't talked about. But one thing that these countries do have is they're very keen on remembering who they are, where they come from. They remember their history, and it's like, but then you look at some places, and I will put Ukraine in this, to where they're trying to erase everything about their history that they don't like. And they're putting up all of these other things that is hyper agreeable. It creates a good narrative, and it's so disingenuous. And it's not just Ukraine. We've seen this all over the globe, but it really is like it becomes the death of a people, and so yeah, I think especially when you have a country like ours that is foundationally like emphasized on liberty, especially where our founders came, it becomes very trepidatious.
And that was really a big problem with like the riots that we were
Yeah.
having for BLM. Is they're tearing down statues of prominent figures like Thomas Jefferson. And you ludicrous. You cannot
Yeah.
do that. You cannot erase that. And that quote you had right there on the bottom,
Yeah.
you could flip that quote easily and just simply say the goal of globalism is the extinction of a country's
Yes.
history, traditions, nationality,
Yes.
culture. That's their goal. Everybody is
Absolutely.
wiped clean and everybody's the same. And once you have that, you remove a human component to fight for
Yes.
what's yours and your people. And that is a natural part of being human. We are tribal creatures,
Mm,
and you need that as a protective mechanism. And
yes.
globalism removes a necessary protective mechanism for the ability to fail and make
Mm.
improvements.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this conversation segues actually quite nicely into one of the topics that we're going to talk about tonight, which is property rights and the taxation on property, because we were talking about this just before we went live, which is, kind of like, how property is in essence, a very fundamental core of which every other right and liberty does stem from. And there's a reason for that. And and property can be anything from like our home or us as an individual, right? And when you start to violate that property right, it opens the door for further violations of rights and liberties, and it happens very quickly. We've seen how fast this happens, and I do think, and I'll allow you to expand on that, obviously, but also coupling in the property taxes. I mean, property taxes, I think, are one of the most egregious usurpation and destructive acts that can occur, because what it does is it basically takes your property and makes you the renter or the tenant, where that property is supposed to be yours. And as soon as the government comes in and tells you what you can and cannot do with your property, now you're experiencing a level of tyranny that is not only very difficult to reverse, but it puts you at the behest of so many other things. It opens the door for so many other forms of government tyranny. And I'll let you take it away and speak on it in whichever direction you want.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's a few versions of this that I've discussed with people when it comes to ideological views. The libertarianism, for anyone that doesn't understand that's listening, is really like an umbrella term. It encapsulates a term called classical liberals, which is not the current progressive Democrat. Classical liberal is more like Thomas Jefferson. You've got your people that believe in the founding the components of the Constitution, and you have other versions of like minarchy, which is just a tax base that provides national for a military at the national level to protect your borders, because you still have a competitive global sphere where people want to take land. I mean, we're seeing it now. Russia is taking land from Ukraine. And this is happening in other places as well. So the local level property taxes in America, they're the gateway for a lot of the socialist practices is coming from that. So if you were to go down more of a Rothbard, even Hoppian route of small communal organizations, and you have your small local, your town, your community, you can impose things at that level if it's agreed upon within the people themselves. But what we have right now is the state level. The states control everything, and they basically allow the existence of a town to take place. And we're going through this at a local level now in my town, where we are a city, but we have a population of just under 30,000 people. But we have a city form of government. And to make any adjustments to our town charter, they have to leave the town through approval and then be sent to the state house to be voted on by the state. There's stuff that we want to change in our town, in our locality, and the state is also imposing other restrictions on us for housing, forcing the towns to accept certain levels of affordable housing to be built. And the property, the root in the property rights is being able to do what you want on your own property and be left alone. If I want to leave my property to engage in commerce, then I can do that. If I want to grow my food on my property, I should be allowed to do that. If I want to collect rainwater on my property, I should be able to do that. I shouldn't be forced by the state to leave my property and engage in any level of commerce with anyone else if I don't need to or I don't want to. The state also has the ability to take property through eminent domain, which is a problem. It really is a problem, because the problem with eminent domain is it's not a clear-cut process a lot of the time. The towns have a lot of ability to take people's belongings through that. We have other issues like through like the DEA through the traffic stops. If you get stopped on a traffic stop and you have a pile of cash on you, the police can just confiscate your cash and claim that it was drug-related cash and steal your money. Things like this are an enormous problem. No-knock raids. The government has found lots of ways and excuses to sell people on these things, and they are stealing from the individual. And you should be able to not only be on your property and not have the government aggress upon you, but you should also be able to freely travel on your person without the government being involved in that as well. So
Yeah.
it really it builds from the personal level, and then it goes to the towns, and then the states should be able to compete in commerce with each other. But as you know, our current system is so flipped upside down with a top heavy federal government that was never meant to be this big. So you can go in a lot of directions on it, but
Yeah.
it's the root is, we were supposed to be free from a king owning all of our land, and we were for a period of time, and we had amazing things like the frontiermen and people expanding out west and down south,
Yeah.
and starting from absolutely nothing and starting these towns from scratch. And when we've moved now into the shift of the federal government holding the purse strings for the states, who are holding the purse strings for the towns.
Yeah.
And you have a complete lack of local control. So if your goal is some kind of minarchist commune, or in my opinion, I'm okay with the towns. I hold more of a minarchist constitutional point of view, and I'm okay with the town government, but I think the town should have the control. You should be able to move the towns that hold your belief systems. And you should not be forced by the state to be doing things the state's bidding, and the state shouldn't be forced by the federal government to do the federal government's bidding, unless there is some trade-off that is works for both. And right now I think we're completely out of whack on all these, and the government has a complete foothold in our personal and our personal rights or property rights, and we have a massive hole we need to climb out of as a country. And we need more individuals that are awake to it. That's the only way that this is going to work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, and when you're talking about, being able just to seize cash and stuff like that, the first thing that popped into my head was civil asset forfeiture. It's one of the most,
yes,
it is so abusive, and it is so just, I don't even know what term is the right term, whether it's authoritarian or tyrannical or whatever. I mean, you could say all of them are, but
what's the difference between that and a mob? It's just a mob. It's a racketeering business where they can steal your belongings for no cause, no trial. It's absurd. In Massachusetts, if you get your guns taken away, and I know this happens in lots of other blue states, if you get your guns confiscated, good luck trying to get them back. The state might sell your property for profit before you can get it back. Right. That is not okay.
And there's really like such little recourse that you can take, if any at all. It's not like you can go to the state and be like, well, at least pay me back what you owe me, like of what you, and there's no way. Like, it's so like, that's why I harp on property rights, and I rail against the notion of property taxes. And you so eloquently just described like the hierarchy of how so much of this works, because you're not wrong. I mean, when you really look at it from the top down, it is an unholy marriage of federal, state, and local. It's something that was never intended to be. The states were supposed to be have as much sovereignty as Germany or the UK or whatever country. We are supposed to have that amount of autonomy. And what we have today,
you need the autonomy. You have to have it to be successful.
Absolutely.
You have to have states within the federation that are on the brink of failing to prevent other states from going down the same path. And then they can correct and mimic successful states. And you have a cycle. We don't have a cycle. Same thing with the banking industry. Too big to fail. Complete bullshit. You're absolutely too big to fail. Because you know what happens when you never fail? You never fix anything. And then you go right back to doing what you're doing. And that's what we did here. Iceland locked up their bankers. Their banking system's doing fantastic. We're on the verge of another 08 collapse because we can't get it together, and we got to line the pockets of certain people.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, that is something that I think is a very difficult, reality for a lot of people. Is like when we were founded, like our founders actually anticipated us to fail and restart several times. Like they didn't expect us just to be like, oh, all right, well, we're just going to create something just to buffer this. And I think what you start to see is that carryover, especially when pertaining to banks and government and when they they assume more control over your property. If they fail, then you fail. And it's like, no, actually, like, I don't want to be attached to that. If I have the autonomy, real true sovereignty and autonomy over myself, my property, etc., to, I mean, in so much as we can, obviously, but it's like, in the end of the day, like, if the state fails, then why does that mean that I would potentially lose my home? Why does that
Right.
mean that I should potentially lose my job? Why does that mean, like, I have to be dragged down with a bunch of failures? Like, and the worst thing is the fact that people, there's this fear, and the fears comes from the elites because they're like, I'm going to lose a ton of money, so we have to bail these people out. And it's like, no, actually, if you were smart about it, and I hate that I'm even arguing for the elites, but it's like, you do realize if they did fail, like, you'd actually probably make more in the long run because they would restructure and be better. And it's like, whether it's the states, whether it's the federal government, and so much of it is it at its essence is a small town. It is, the local community. It is your home, property rights issue. And I would argue that property rights is very much, codified in the 10th Amendment, because when you look at the states have control over their own property. They have far more than I think most people even realize. And to kind of give them a plug, the 10th Amendment Center has done a ton of work, obviously in the 10th Amendment, but they're like, notice how it doesn't matter if it's Democrats or Republicans, but anytime you bring up the 10th Amendment, it's one of the most dirtiest words to hear in Washington, because it's what it does is it terrifies these people that, oh no, they're not going to be under this federal supremacy. It's going to be this situation to where they're actually going to have, they're going to be a sovereign state again. And you know there were a couple times, Sean, where I was almost excited, with the border issue and with a few other issues. Chris Ann Hall, another fantastic person, when the border issue was heightening down by Texas, she's like, you do realize, Abbott, if the federal government is not fulfilling their obligation to secure the border, you as the state have the ability to disobey the federal government, secure your border, and protect your citizens. Like, full stop. And he, like, started creeping into that, and then somebody said something to him, and he pussied out, and he didn't do it, and it's like, dude, you were so close. And I'll kind of hand it over on this, but, like, look at what happened when, with, like, the cannabis thing. And that's one of the big points that I've heard a lot of people talk about, especially libertarians, the 10th Amendment Center, is look at how that took off eventually. And it didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen over a year. It was a concerted, consistent effort to assert the 10th Amendment, assert the rights of the people. And that's what it takes. And I think, I firmly believe that we need to make an effort, a concerted effort like that, whether it's the libertarians or whomever, to really work and make some serious headway in getting rid of something like the property taxes, even if it is just in your city, or if it is in your state, or whatever the case is, because that, I think, would then bring such a healthy realization of how enslaved you really are. And I know that's, a word that a lot of people contest, but it is slavery. It's monetary slavery, if you will. You're a debt slave, you're a renter, you're practically a serf. And it's like, no, I think there has to be an effort to asserting property rights. Absolutely. It's at the core of our country. So
Absolutely. I think with the property rights, and a lot of people think that you can't do anything at all without these property taxes, and that's just not true. You can raise local taxes on items in your towns and cities,
yeah,
to replace some of that, and then you have
sure.
more of a user-based scenario where you're paying taxes on usage on certain things. It can be
Yep.
replaced. The goal of this is you should be able to own your property, not lease it from the government.
Yes.
And right now, we all lease our property from the government, because if you just don't show up for a few years and you don't pay these taxes, the government can come in and take your property. Take your property, take it away from your family. And one of the reasons why wealth maintained it's one of the ways you gain wealth within a family is through land ownership. It's always been the case. There's a finite amount of usable land in the world, and those who own the land have been the wealthy historically. And in our country, you should be able to own your land outright and not have the government walk in and take it from you. And if you kind of touched on the marijuana thing and the 10th Amendment, and I would agree with that, where the more the states exercise their individual rights, the less the federal government is going to like it, because it's a power. The power is in a vacuum, and the federal government has the power right now. They hold the purse strings. They've set this stuff up themselves. Unfortunately, even though Congress is supposed to be representing their congressional districts in their states, what they've done is they've sucked all this power up into their congressional seats, and the same with the Senate. And it's not the way it's supposed to work. So you have an item like marijuana that's not worth the fight, because they know it's not worth the fight. And they've been losing it. They've chosen to not fight it to the level where I think some people thought they would, which is good. They've let it go a little bit, and now we need to take advantage of that in the way that that's happened and use that in other areas, which I know we're going to talk about Defend the Guard, but that is a conceptual that is part of the concept of Defend the Guard and where your launch point is. And once you get it in so many states, if you can get it in 25 states in half the country, the federal government has no choice but to take a serious look at it, because now they have a serious problem on their hands. And that is the way with anything that the federal government's doing. If you wanted to lower the drinking age to 18, you get enough states to do it, it will go back down, because if enough states go, you can take your highway funding and shove it, they will have to revert on that. And you can do this with plenty of other things. The people need to want it, though, and you have to be able to sell it to people, and you need to sell it in a way that's palpable to the citizens in the country and make it a worthwhile fight. And you have to have people in place that can win the propaganda war, because that's how all this gets enacted, is through propaganda. And you need propaganda on your own side to play a Machiavellian game and force it back. It's the only way to do it. And people hopefully are getting that, because we got a little bit more free speech at this point in the town square of X, and that needs to be used responsibly and wielded in a way that benefits everybody. And what we're seeing on there is all kinds of infighting now and everything else, but we do need to use the 10th Amendment. We need to establish states' rights again, and shrink the size of the federal government back down to where it should be, which is almost non-existent. And that should function solely for the reasons its existence is there in the first place, which is to protect the borders, deal with immigration stuff, protect the individuals from the states violating their rights, and protect the commerce between the states, and not abuse other stuff like the Commerce Clause and everything else. Like, it's a total mess, but I'm optimistic. Marijuana's been successful. I'm hoping that some of the other drug stuff does become more successful. The drug stuff is its own little box of nonsense and control from the government. Government shouldn't be controlling what we put in our bodies. If you want to make poor decisions on your own accord, that's fine. And again, there's plenty of people not doing drugs now because they know that they might get fentanyl that might kill them. How did we learn that? Well, a lot of people had to die to learn that lesson. Why doesn't everybody smoke crack? Well, because the 80s were pretty rough, and that killed a lot of people in the 80s. So unfortunately, you have these cycles, and there's other components to why people do drugs, but people do not venture into the recreational stuff if they know that it's like legitimately dangerous. And the only way you know that is the actual the actual outcomes and the numbers we're seeing and some of that stuff. So absolutely, I'm totally with you. We need a turning point on some of this, and the more states that join in, which was happening on the border and didn't. I really wished it did push. I do. There were enough Republican governors who were on board with it. Enough Republican governors had enough. And that's all that it takes, is enough Republican governors or Democrat governors, whatever the issue is, to say, hey, we're done. We have a massive influx of, we have an invasion of migrants, and we're not, the federal government is lapsing in its duty to handle the issue. So we're going to solve it ourselves and force their hand.
Yeah, and there's a couple points I want to hit off of before I fold the self-defense aspect of property rights, because I think those two go hand in hand. But, again, I try to encourage people, if you can, it sounds trivial, but if you can, get a piece of property that's yours. Buy a piece of property so that you at least have something to use to further assert your liberty and your rights. That was one of the first things I was ever taught when it came to the realm of liberty, because it gives you a really good backstop to kind of put your foot on and push off of, and it gives you a little more stability when you try to make a case. And I think, aside from just having a home or whatever the case is, and aside from even just our own selves as being property, and asserting property rights, like, one of the areas that I feel gets hit really hard is business owners. I mean, if you think the housing thing is bad, which it really is, it's horrible, and I think it's even worse in some states from others. But when you look at business owners, look at all of the ridiculous things that they have to jump through just to comply, and just to start a business, just to fund a business, who you can trade to, who you can't trade with, who you can do business with, who you can't do business with. And I was actually just talking, with Mark from Centerline Systems. We had a discussion about business, and about how, look, just because our country doesn't like another country, why should that limit, my or his ability to be able to buy and sell with a company in that other country? Like, it's not for them to sit there and decide, like, oh, you can and can't do that, or to put restrictions on it. And moreover, like, I think this also feeds into the taxation thing. Who is the government to come in and say, you owe me half or however much of what you make every single year? Because income taxes are absolutely abhorrent, and I think they do infringe. They are just one more infringement on property rights. And and so the business owner aspect is absolutely devastating. And I do really think that progression, well, I think some of it is like, people really don't know what they're talking about. I think a majority of it is by design, because it is a way and a mechanism and a means to be able to consolidate power, to control the outcomes. And, and unfortunately, whether you have tariffs, or whether you have this or that, or sanctions, and in the end of the day, it's like, yeah, but you know what? You're still putting these ridiculous standards, these ridiculous pieces of legislation, these rules and regulations on businesses. It's an area that you have no authority delegated to you to do. And so you're not even going after one of the biggest primary issues that exists, and so it just kills me, because it's like when Mark and I were talking, like, think about the markets that so many American companies miss out on, because they're told, if you don't leave this country, or if you sell something to this country, then you're going to get sanctioned, or you're going to get fined, or you're going to do this. And then, you look at a jobs report and they're like, oh, well, this company had to, either they went bankrupt, they had to sell their company, they had to lay off X amount of employees, or they're not getting business for Q2. It's like, well, yeah, like, you literally neutered their ability to do the thing that we talk about doing, except it's so disingenuous that it destroys the whole notion of actually having a free market. It just it kind of aggravates me to some degree, just how hypocritical this whole bluster is. And then you look at the action. So it's, the business aspect really is something that grinds my gears. And there are a lot of good companies out there. And I do think that a lot more companies would be able to have American-made textiles, American-made components to use, to buy from, if the government wasn't as involved, and if there wasn't as much regulation in how, where, when, and whatever means they use to be able to acquire those things. But instead, the reason we don't have more American made in many cases, in my humble opinion, and this is my opinion, is because they've made it so hard for a company to operate in this country if you're not Target, Walmart, even
Yes.
a bank, Wells Fargo. You get where I'm going with it. So would you like to elaborate on that before we segue
Yeah,
into what defense?
I totally agree. I think it's disgusting when you have politicians running on a platform of helping small business owners, and then they'll go and vote for more regulation within those industries.
Yeah.
It hurts the industries. It hurts the local businesses. You have a company like Amazon who only exists at the level they exist now because they could afford to either go around regulations, they could afford to take the regulatory hit and keep running. So they were playing the
Mhm.
long game where if we pay these fines and we push this long enough, then local businesses, smaller businesses, competitors will fail. And this isn't a regulatory example, but it's just a business practice example. There was Amazon sells diapers, and there was a
Yeah.
diaper company that was unbelievably, I forget what their name was, but they were the biggest online diaper company there was
Okay.
before Amazon. Okay, Amazon's business practice, which is something they should be allowed to do, but just as an example of a company so wealthy and large that they can just take the hit, they sold at a loss specifically to put the company out of business. And then once the
Sure.
company was out of business, then they raised the prices.
Yep.
They've done the same thing with regulations, and other companies like Walmart, Target, the warehouse companies, like the Home Depot, Lowe's, like all these large franchises have the ability and the funds to withstand the regulatory hits that ultimately limit growth at the local level and
Sure.
the upward mobility of other companies. So yeah, I agree that the regulatory stuff kills companies. They make it sound like it's this fair business practice stuff, but in the end of the
Mhm.
day, we see who's getting rich. We know who's running the show here,
Sure.
and we're years into this, and I agree. Like
Absolutely.
if you're going to trade outside the country, it is a complex topic
Mhm.
about international influence from the government versus what the individual should be able to sell, and there's definitely some components there that are definitely complicated. But
Sure.
generally speaking, I think that the individual should be able to trade with who they want to trade with if it's beneficial, and if you're able to send your money to other countries that don't, where the dollar is worth more there and help people there, then I don't see
Yeah.
what the problem is with that.
Sure.
I know that there are definitely, that's also a thing with the individual too, like the individual consumer. And we have a lack of educated consumer base in the country, depending on what it is. There are some people that are very
Mhm.
educated in specific products because they have specific belief systems. Like if you don't want products that are animal products, you can go buy synthetic stuff and
Sure.
replicas of whatever. Um, but if an individual's company is purchasing from Venezuela as an example, as a socialist
Mhm.
hellhole, and you don't want to do business with somebody that does
Yep.
business with the likes of that government, regardless of the people are fine, but maybe the consumer shouldn't buy from there.
Sure.
If you don't want to buy your phones from um, slave labor over in Asia, from like you know places where they have to put nets outside the buildings because the people keep jumping off the buildings and killing themselves because it's so bad. You should
Yeah.
be able to buy phones at another place, and there
Yeah.
are startups that have started because of these issues. People want conflict free products. They want products that aren't built by
Yeah.
slave labor, and a lot of American consumers are on board with paying a little bit more money if it benefits them. Not everybody is,
Sure.
but a lot of people are. Made in the USA does mean something to Americans
Yeah.
still, and it should. Supporting local businesses is a huge thing. Personally, I'll buy stuff as long as I can afford it down the street. I will buy stuff locally. As an example, my town council run, I have a limited budget and I got to make it
Right.
work. So I decided to buy a couple of things online, still in the US. And then I went to the local print shop to print up other materials because I thought it was important to support a local business, but I just couldn't dump everything into the local business. But I did still make a point. I mean, so far half my budget has gone local and the other half has
Sure.
remained in the US, just in other places. So I think it's on the consumers. I don't think it's really necessarily the job of the federal government to deal with that. And I would agree with you that regulatory stuff is absolutely just killing the country and the country's business, the middle class, and prevents people from having upward mobility in society.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And and perhaps if you're willing to come on. And again, obviously, there's a lot that can be spoken to, even in a greater realm of liberty in places like Europe, because I think to some degree, if we look at how they do things, especially their food, I mean, and then you compare it to the United States and you look at their products, and I mean, yes, they do certainly have many of their own issues. There's no disputing that whatsoever. But then it's like you do look at some of their foods and you look at how, people are able to produce something. Now, the, let's there's a whole side conversation there about how they treat their farmers, of course, in some countries, and we've seen kind of the backlash that's occurred from there. But even aside from that, I do think that some of the European countries do things a little bit better. They do have certain ways of doing something better, and I think one of the things that our founders definitely, I think, embodied is like, hey, like we are basically providing you a blueprint to build an amazing country. We want it to be liberty centric. We want the individual's rights to be respected and protected. And and we're codifying many things in this Constitution that we believe are the best way to go. However, they also kind of expected, like, but if you see a better way of doing something that's going to supplement the foundation of this, then absolutely do it. And I think there's nothing wrong with being able to take certain aspects that we see as being very good and being able to implement it. Now, I think the bad portion of that is you have people that just want to sign something into law, and they want it executive ordered. And so they don't want to actually go through the process to solidify something that's really good. As long, and there's caveats to that statement, but the point being is like, if it is something that's truly worth having, that's going to benefit, that's going to create a nice buffer or a hedge against tyranny, and is going to support property rights, it's going to support the individual's rights and liberty, then let's do this a constitutional way, and let's actually have it solidified. So if somebody doesn't like it down the road, they can't just sign it, out of law. They can't just decide to get rid of it. There's a lot that goes into that. And I think with that being said, this is a really good segue too, as it pertains to, the first law of nature, which pertains to the right to self-defense, the ability of self-preservation. And and I'll let you actually kind of take this, because I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about this, but it really does kind of go hand in hand with property rights. It really does go hand in hand with so many other things that we were founded on. And I think, if we can't secure our property rights, it becomes very hard to create a good defense. If you have to defend your family, if you have to defend yourself, if you have to, take that unfortunate step to where you have to use force to stop somebody from violating your rights or liberty. So take it away, Sean. Please kind of give me and the audience your opinions or your point of view as it pertains to liberty in that subject.
Yeah, I am a huge Second Amendment proponent. I think it's a crucial component to preserving our liberty as citizens in the country, and as a global entity, as the really the only place that is truly dangerous to try to take on. From a global scale, it protects us. It also protects us in the individual scale from our own federal government, which is the whole point of the Second Amendment, is to protect us from our own government, because they're the most dangerous ones to us directly and immediately. And bring into property rights and self-ownership, you have not only the right to your property, but you have the right to protect your property. No one has the right to take your property from you, and
Correct.
you should be able to defend that right, quite frankly. And your property isn't just your house and your land or your car, or it's also your food. You own your food. You own your food supply. And if someone can come along and take your food supply, you die. Someone can come along and take your money and your valuables. You can't buy food. You can't afford your house. You can't, and it's a butterfly effect. when you start eroding the Second Amendment, and we have had erosions of the Second Amendment in this country now for decades, and I think that anyone should be able to own whatever they're able to own.
Yes.
I don't think there should be limitations, and there are people that think that sounds crazy, but all you have to do is look back to the Revolutionary War, war with France. You've got in Europe at that time as well. You had private military groups owned by wealthy individuals aiding countries in owning their own battleships, their own gunships. Their I mean, in our country, you can't own a semi-automatic firearm in some areas, or semi-automatic rifles of certain types at this point. And like, you can own a cannon. And the whole reason is because one is more convenient to carry than the other. Look, I think that it's a pivotal component to liberty. It's necessary. Without it, you do not have true freedom. If the government is not afraid of the people, you don't have true freedom. And I mean, we can go in a lot of directions on this, but not only do I support it, I think it's completely necessary. And without it, you get what's going on in Europe. They've stripped those rights of those people. In some places, you can own a firearm to hunt. That's not good enough. That shouldn't be the purpose of the sole purpose of owning a firearm. It's a misconstrued argument in America where people want to argue that you should be able to own a firearm for target and hunting so you can feed your family. And while that's a component to it, it's not the sole or the primary. The primary is self-protection and protecting your property. And there are places in this country where you have that right vested. You have castle doctrine, you have the ability to protect yourself, and then you have other generally blue left-leaning states like mine who want you to run from someone when they break in your house. They want you to somehow read a criminal's mind when they're attacking your family. If the person breaks in your house without their own firearm, you could be up against a manslaughter charge or something, some nonsense. And it's like, look, you got to draw the lines with common sense. And the line there is, if you've decided to break the law, steal from someone, enter their domicile and attack them, or do whatever you want to them, those individuals in that home should have the ability to protect themselves by any means necessary with no restrictions. And you should have no assumptions that you're going to walk out of that house alive.
Right.
And I think that provides a safer society for everybody. Actually, it provides a real hard line in the sand for the way that we deal with these problems. And we should never be siding on the sides of felons and thieves and burglars and anyone who's breaking the law and violating your rights. We should always be siding with the individual protecting their rights. And that should go across the board. You should have 100%. You should be backed up 100% by the government, even for exercising any of your rights, including the right to self-defense. And there should not be a question. And it's a societal like virus almost that people believe that that's not the case, that you should allow people to steal from you because it's just it's just a wallet. It's just a car. It's, and that once you have those components creep in and they blossom, you end up with stuff that we have going on where you kind of end up in an anarcho-tyranny state where the government attacks the law-abiding citizens and allows everyone else to assault them. And you can't have a society function well like that. It doesn't work. And we should do everything we can to push back against that. In Massachusetts, we have a huge encroachment on our Second Amendment rights going on right now. And our governor has doubled and tripled down on that violation of those rights. And they're finally being fought back against, which is fantastic. Finally. So I hope that's super successful. I hope our group with the ALC, the American Liberty Caucus, can assist in those efforts when stuff starts to go to, when bills are drawn up and ballots are put together. We had a petition go in to block this and send it to the people so the people could vote on it in the state as a ballot initiative. And it was blocked by the governor. And they pushed it through, and then they at the end of the day pushed a bill through with a bunch of stuff in it that requires funding with no funding to back it up. So they pushed it through as an emergency action. It was emergent that you cannot buy an AR-15, an emergency. We can't have these sold anymore. If you own one, that's fine, but we can't buy anymore. And then they had bits and pieces of this bill. They're like, well, it's an emergency, but we don't have funding for this yet, so we'll exclude that. It's an emergency, but we can't really do this part either yet. And we don't have language on how police departments should deal with it. So we'll just ignore that in the meantime too.
Sure.
And other states are doing the same thing. And it's completely ridiculous. Firearm regulations are ridiculous. Suppressors should be completely unregulated. You should not have regulations on the size of your firearm. That's unbelievably ridiculous. It has nothing to do with the round coming out of the gun. And you should be able to carry, if you want to walk down the street with 500 rounds of ammunition and get exhausted walking around a block, I mean, that should be your prerogative. It doesn't matter to me. I went to New Hampshire state convention for the Libertarian Party there. There were people open carrying at the convention. One guy exercising his rights, AR, bunch of mags on him. Didn't bother anybody. I mean, did it look weird? Yeah, sure. But if you want to go look weird, that's not my problem. You just mind your own business. So I don't care. Right. No, I think we would be in total agreement on that anyways. If you want to, you should have that right, and it needs to be exercised. And I honestly wish people would exercise it more. Because it would be more socially acceptable to exercise that right. And that's ultimately really what we need is we need the general public who doesn't grow up with that stuff to be comfortable with it. And I agree with open carry laws. That's how I think we do that. But, concealed carry laws should be just fine as well. You shouldn't have to flag everyone that you have a firearm on you. That has its own, there's lots of opinions on that stuff as well. But yeah, I mean, you can take it, but I think that it's a completely pivotal component to our freedom in the country and globally, quite frankly.
Yeah, you hit a lot of really good points. And there's a couple that I'll remark on because I think you did a really good job of outlining kind of one of them, or I should say the general argument. I've heard people say too, especially as it pertains to an individual's domicile, when somebody comes through the threshold of your door, that's not, they weren't asked to be there. They're not supposed to be there. That in and of itself would be construed as, a somewhat violent action, especially if you're going through a locked door or you're going through an unopened door. It's intent, to breach the security or the sanctity of a person's home. And to many degrees, I would agree with that because it's like, look, you're obviously not supposed to be there. Nobody asked you to be there. And you are now putting yourself through that door or that doorway that you're not supposed to go through. It doesn't matter whether it's actually locked or not locked. And now you're creating the conditions, in the very least, to be very, very suspicious. And it, it's like, and if somebody meets you with the instrument of their choosing, whether that's a firearm, a baseball bat, whatever, I mean, that's the expectation. I mean, it's no different than if I ended up going through your door one day, Sean, and you're like, what are you doing here? You better leave. Otherwise there's going to be ramifications. I mean, to some people, they have looked at it as like, no, that is the starting as like an act of violence, and it's, so there is a lot of things that can be taken away from that. And I do think that, especially as it pertains to property rights and not just the self-defense aspect, what is that breaching point? And in the end of the day, like, I'm not comfortable with the government being able to fully decide necessarily what that is, because it's so different for each person. It's so different for each interaction. And that's why you go to court. That's why you have court cases, to be able to say, hey, look, all I was doing was sitting here eating some ramen noodles, watching my favorite episode of Seinfeld or whatever. And all of a sudden this dude just comes, rolling through my door. And I produced a weapon. He didn't stop. I had to stop what I perceived was the threat. And a lot of people have this idea of like, oh, well, like they were unarmed. Well, I don't know about you, but I've talked to people who've worked in ER rooms, and I've talked to people who've worked in areas of law enforcement and stuff like that. And they're like, things can go really bad really quick if somebody gets close enough to you, to the point to where they can strip something away from you. They can overpower you. It doesn't matter. And especially as it pertains, and this isn't meant to be construed as anything sexist, because I can already hear the shrieking comments, but it's like, look, like in the end of the day, like women do have a certain disposition to where if you have a guy that comes through the door, there's a really good chance, more often than not, that there's going to be a power issue there. And so the last thing you want to do is be like, yeah, there's nothing that you can use. Unfortunately, this is the way it is. It's like, no, honey, I want you to go and make sure that you know how to use the 9mm or whatever the case is, so that if I'm not here, you can adequately protect yourself
Yep.
and our kids or whatever the case is. And
yeah, like it's an equalizer. At the end of the day, it's an equalizer. You can be a grandma. We hear those stories all the time. Grandma pulled out the old revolver out of the dresser drawer and shot the intruder and called the police, and that stuff happens. And a lot of police officers go by like the 21-foot rule.
Yeah.
If someone gets in your area within 21 feet, the chances of you being able to take them down is diminished, and their reach to you is almost impossible to defend. And people need to take a look at, when you walk in your house, how many feet does it take to get to your living room? How many feet does it get to your bedroom? If you wanted to run in your house and run upstairs real quick, how long does it take you? 10 seconds? I mean, people have a very false sense of security when it comes to the police being able to arrive immediately. That doesn't happen. You have, a minimum 5-minute response times, and people think the police are always waiting outside and stuff. No, like if you live on the far side of town, you're 10 minutes out. I mean, I worked EMS, I worked fire. You had plenty of places in every single town that were just on the outskirts, that were just outside that normal response time. But there's always a response time. The police are almost never right there. That is so unique. And the ability to immediately protect yourself and then have the judicial system do its business after is where you need to position yourself. And the government should be supporting that. It should never be supported in the opposite direction. Accidents are going to happen. People accidentally enter a home. I don't think you should. It should for the individual homeowner, it should absolutely be up to them based on the situation. Accidents happen, but if someone kicks your door down, that's the end of the road from you right there. If somebody accidentally walks in your house, it's the wrong house. If you're outside, if you get past, what are you doing in my house? And the answer isn't, oh, I'm sorry. That's it. Like there's no discussion. Okay. Like that you've answered my question. You didn't, so yeah, I agree with you. It's, I wish it was a larger topic for women. I do think that group is growing. The firearm ownership with women is growing, and it should grow because it's an equalizer. And, you have equal rights. We have rights. We all have rights. All the adults have the same rights, and women should exercise their rights to firearms in the same manner that men do. It should not be just a male hobby. It should be taken seriously, and you brought up Europe a few times, and they're small, they have smaller towns. They have more cohesive units. America is very spread out. We're unique. We have a lot of land. We get a lot of land mass to cover. There are places where the police are half an hour away. You can't be limiting someone's ability to protect themselves and then say, oh, well, the police will be there in 35 minutes. Or in some, trash city, the police probably aren't going to get there. So good luck. Or come to the station tomorrow and fill the report out. Thanks for calling us.
If you're still alive, minor details. It's, and there's two comments, Mark from Centerline, he's like, you could just run away, which you hear that argument all the time. And it really comes from people who are either really that naive or devoid of any, you can tell they've never had any type of real confrontation ever, because it's like anybody I grew up doing martial arts. I've grown up doing a lot of like force on force, like type of activities and stuff like that. And it's like, if you think, even as a guy, if you think that there's not the potential for somebody to close the distance, to be able to, all it takes is for somebody to get a hold of you, and it becomes a drastically different situation. And and like you were saying, if it gets to that point, the last thing you want to do is to basically, like, yes, there are certain situations to where retreating and being able to move to a position of betterment, if you will, a better position to defend from, is good, or to be able to actually get out of that area altogether. But for most people, that's seldom the case. And it's like it's never, these people operate off of this ideal situation in which you get to choose. It's like they have this idea of like, oh, you get to choose when crime happens to you. No, you don't. Like, look at how many people are just driving down the road and they take one, because there's gang activity ensuing. There's whatever, like, and I'm sure you've seen that, as somebody who's in, was in the medical field. It's like, look, like a lot of people I feel like it's very prevalent, especially in more democratically run states. Look at how many kids, how many innocent people, they woke up hoping that they were going to have a good day. They didn't choose to be shot. They didn't choose to be stabbed. They didn't choose. And because you don't get that choice, all you can do is be prepared for when that choice, or when that situation happens, and for your ability to respond to that in the most effective way. And so when you neuter that and you use the argument of like, oh, well, you could have just done this, it's so naive, and it's so devoid of reality. And I think, like Gene, I have his comment up here, like, I feel like that's a very big problem in several countries in Europe, whether it's the UK, I would even argue Germany, and several other places. Like, look, you should not be criminalized. First off, you should never be presumed guilty. First and foremost, there should always be the presumption of innocence. But that being said, it's like this whole notion of like, oh, well, you're the criminal regardless. I mean, we're basically at that precipice here in Minnesota. I've sent a few things in the chats, kind of keeping everybody in the caucus abreast of things that go on here, and it's just ridiculous. It just really speaks to that naivete, and it's sad that, like, even if somebody wants to defend themselves, ultimately, I think what it really befalls is like, if the person that's responding to your call for help, that officer, after an incident ensues, you just got to hope in some of these places that they're having a really good day and they end up liking you, for them to be able to testify somewhat on your behalf, right? Because it's almost like a non-winnable situation. And it's really, really, really sad and disheartening. So, yeah, I think you hit on a lot of really good points, and I'm so happy that we've actually been able to have people that have chimed in and provided responses, because you start to see so much of the variations between places where people live. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, we're lucky in this country that we even have the ability to do it, but we definitely have an erosion in certain states. I know you guys are having similar problems that we have, and it's really unfortunate. And a lot of it is kind of, we have a very comfortable society, and people don't want to think of those things, and it makes them uncomfortable to think about. But yeah, no one goes to bed every night, or that's the first of it's the 1st of March. Tonight's the night for the home invasion. I got to make sure I got my shoes on so I can run away tonight.
Make
like,
sure
it just happens.
I've
been to houses post home invasion. It's horrific that and no one wants to go through that. And a lot of firearm owners are on board with, you have your stuff, you've got your setup, and you're prepared. And no one also goes to bed going, I can't wait to get them tonight. Like, I know I want to go to sleep, and I want my family to wake up tomorrow when we go about our day. I don't want the worst day of our lives to happen. Like, and people think people are gun happy and they want to shoot people. And no, I just don't want to be bothered. Leave me alone.
There's a reason it's been memed so much, with like the Claymore Roombas and stuff like that. It's become like almost a joke at this point. Not in even a negative way, but it's like, oh yeah, like we're gonna hit, welcome to the rice paddies, and and it's like all of these different things. But it's like, in the end of the day, like, most people, and I say most because you do always have the outliers, but it's like, most people don't go to bed and they're just like, all right, man, like, I'm sleeping with my plate carrier tonight, because tonight could be the night. And yeah, it's not like, one, you actually don't even seem like a rational human being at that point. You might need a hug or somebody to talk to, which is all right. But at the same time, it's like there's you do have to have some level of preparedness, and I think that's where a lot of people, they have the nightstand gun or they have whatever it is. But it's yeah, it just gets to be this thing to where when you start to violate property rights, when you start to, and by extension, you start to violate, the right of self-defense, and most importantly, which most people don't get right at all, the Second Amendment is first and foremost about tyrannical government. Like that is like full bore. It is about the threat of tyrannical government, and then you have everything else that comes after that. Like that was
Yeah, I
the
mean,
biggest fear.
the
And
whole root of it is was a fight over militia arms in Massachusetts. That
yeah,
was the root of it. They knew it was coming. The militia of the people went to go
yeah,
get their firearms, and the king was trying to confiscate the arms, so they couldn't defend
yep,
themselves because you had a
right,
tyrannical government. And that's it. It doesn't have to go further than that. The rest
yeah,
of it is just a bonus.
yeah, right,
It that's it. And it ends with that. Yeah.
yeah. It's and so again, therein lies the education thing. And so yeah, I mean, there's the realm. I mean, it really just does go to support the notion that everything really does come from the extension of property rights. And again, like we mentioned earlier, property is us, dude. Like if we don't have ownership and autonomy over ourselves, then it becomes very hard to have rights and liberties anywhere else. And with that being considered, I love what you said earlier, because it really does hammer home that notion of rights not exercised or rights not kept. We must, it is imperative that we exercise our rights at every single turn. And this isn't just, I want to be clear, like, while these mentalities and this sentiment in this foundation is concreted into our founding documents as Americans, it is the foundation of who we are. This very sentiment is for everybody. So, especially with what Europe is going through right now, and I talk a lot about Europe on Centerline Systems when I do podcasts over there, and in a lot of conversations. But the reason I talk about Europe is because, like you said, like we are inherently tied to European history, to European ancestry. Our founders came from Europe, from Great Britain and the UK. And so we do have certain things there to where it's like, no, like you guys also have these rights, you have these liberties. And I would encourage my European brothers and sisters to start to exercise these things and start to get to a point to where it's like, look, dude, like don't ever expect government to do what's best for you. It's never going to happen. And so I'll kind of leave it at that. If you have any final comments, and otherwise we'll get to the defend the guard and cover that a little bit.
Yeah, we can touch on that real quick.
Yeah. So, defend the guard obviously is a really big thing for the American Liberty Caucus. I've talked to you about it, and I've talked to many other people in ALC about it, and and it's something that I think is also very centric and a huge portion of the to the 10th Amendment and state sovereignty, because when you look at the realm of the National Guard, they essentially are supposed to belong to the states. That is something that was very carefully considered. And when you don't have the ability to actually have fundamental control over the people that you're supposed to, it becomes very problematic. And and not only that, but it's like the National Guard also has a responsibility to the states, and also potentially defending the borders. If that security is not fulfilled by the federal government, then the states have a unique opportunity to be like, all right, look, we're going to use them for disaster relief. We're going to use them for securing our borders. We're going to use them. That is the whole, like, that was the primary purpose. And so I think that what Defend the Guard really does is it really helps bring under control that area of the National Guard, and it stops us also additionally from just allowing our National Guardsmen to be pushed into unconstitutional wars, illegitimate wars, conflicts, confrontations, and it really does go to a certain way to preserving liberty. So I'd love to hear what you have to bring up about that and hear what you have to say regarding that.
Yeah, so Defend the Guard is an initiative that's been going on for more than a few years now. It's finally getting a lot of traction. It's something that the Libertarian Party supports as a platform issue, which is fantastic. The caucus supports it for the same reasons many other people support it. And the whole concept of it is it's a state law, so you have states taking their rights back from the federal government, and all they're saying is if you want to use National Guard troops from our state, you have to have an official declaration of war from Congress, which hasn't happened since World War II. So you need an official declaration of war. We can't be sending off our National Guard troops for these skirmishes everywhere. It does not limit them from overseas training. It doesn't limit them from their current training regimen. Based on the concerns we've seen from certain legislative bodies around the country, they're concerned about funding. They're concerned about like backhanded funding from the feds, where they move resources around and they take resources away from states, which would affect individuals' jobs within the Guard. They actually can't do that. I can't remember the law off the top of my head, but there is an ordinance already in place that prevents that from happening. So that can't happen. It's actually supported by Pete Hegseth. He's come out in favor of it. So at a minimum over the next few years, you won't have any changes. That's already supported. And I think part of that support is because the president has expressed the fact that he doesn't want to start any new wars. Imagine that. So I think it's a good thing for the states. The states do need to take their rights back from the federal government. And I know there's plenty of people that the states have no rights. And I understand that principled argument. But we have a separation of the federal government and the state governments. And the state governments need to take back the ability to control their state resources. And as we saw this year with hurricanes and floods, whatever happened in Hawaii, we have needs for the National Guard troops in our states, and they need to be home. They need to be handling emergencies in the states themselves. And if Congress does declare, then they can take control at the federal level of those Guard troops. It's a very simple law. It's based in principle. It's based in just following the Constitution, which is unfortunate. And I know that there are a lot of states as well that have pushed back and said, well, this is an issue that Congress, you should take up with your congressman. And while that's true, unfortunately, the Congress is apparently completely fine with violating the Constitution and doing what we're doing now. So instead of that avenue and wishing things got better, you take some action and take that power back, and don't allow the federal government to abuse our National Guard troops and send them overseas for a year in a conflict that is not approved for whatever reasons that they're telling us. And whether it's spreading democracy or freeing oil fields, we shouldn't be sending our Guard troops overseas to deal with these issues. So we support it. Many libertarians support it just as a principled issue, which would be just following our contracts that we have. And the Constitution is a contract between the people and the government. And the government is violating that contract. So that's the gist of it. In Massachusetts, we have a couple of bills going to the House for this session that are going to be heard in committee. We are calling and phone banking for other states. We have people in the caucus doing that. The Libertarian Party has a few people sprinkled in. Defend the Guard phone banking is headed on by a gentleman, Diego Rivera, who I would find him on X if you want to be involved. There's an ongoing chat, and he'll walk you through how to go through the whole process, which I think is great for any grassroots activism. You need to know how to do the stuff. And the Democrats are very active in these areas, and everyone else needs to be active because we can't be complacent. That's how we got where we are now.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, it's really just taking that control back from the federal government and saying, no, you can't take our troops whenever you feel like it and send them overseas to go into a conflict that's not approved. And, and then you're ruining people's lives. People are getting killed. All these guys have PTSD. The suicide rate is through the roof with vets. Like, we've got so many things we've seen in the last 20 years. And I'm so happy that our generation has like woken up to some of this, saw what our parents went through with Vietnam, had our own generation experience this endless Middle Eastern war. And, we need to push back against it. And Congress is still running on stuff that they did, post 9/11. And the world has changed. Our situation's changed. I don't think a lot of people believe the reasons why we were over there and what we were doing were rooted in weeding out terrorism in Iraq. And, I think it's a really good thing for us to support. And I would highly recommend anyone look up your local state's Defend the Guard, go to defendtheguard.com, find out more information and seek out how to help out, because it is actively growing. It is moving along in certain states further than it ever has. And like we talked about earlier, when it came to drugs and marijuana and the tipping point, it's the same concept. Hopefully this tips over at some point and you get over 25 states, 28 states, and the snowball gets pushed down the hill. And before you know it, they are actually listening. And that's what we do.
Yeah, no, I think you did a really good job of not only explaining it, but going over a lot of the various aspects of it. And, Mark, from Centerline Systems, he brings up a point, and I've talked to him about this, about the 180-day point, which is, like he said, it Title 52. He thinks, and I still come from the position to where that shouldn't even be a thing. It's one of those things to where it's this exception, it's this exception, and it's it's like the perpetual excuse of like, well, we just need this, and it's like, okay, but like at what point too also does it get to the point to where where does that get extended? I mean, it's this slippery slope to where it's like, okay, now it's one year, we can have them go up to 1 year, and then before where does it end? And Mark and I have had a fantastic conversation about this, and we've talked about a lot of the different nuances and facets to various things surrounding military deployment, the National Guard, and I think we do to some degree more often than not agree on a lot of different points. And I can't obviously speak for him. He's not physically here, but he is in the comments, and I'm happy he brought this up, because I think that there are certain things that should be gone back over and looked at, and like, okay, does it actually pass the constitutional litmus test, or is it something that came about the GWAT era because they wanted the ability to do whatever it is that they want, and I don't know how long, to be fair, I don't know how long Title 52 has been around, but we did see like, I think and I could be wrong, and Mark, if you want, put it down in the comments, but I think Minnesota was one of the most deployed National Guard units in the country. And so when you look at that, it's like, okay, but at that point, if that's the case, then why do we even have a general military? If you're just going to like just keep bringing them into every single thing that we have, it's like, so it also kind of begs the question also to where, if we're going to just be using the National Guard, then okay, let's consolidate a little bit and have that as the main force. Or if it's not meant to be the main force, then let's start treating it that way and allow the National Guard to be reserved for the states to address our issues. It's and I see Mark giving a thumbs up. I appreciate you, brother. Thank you for
I just did a quick little thing. It's rooted from legislation, the Militia Act in 1903. So
okay,
what I where I would lead from that is while there might be a law in place, just because there's a law in place doesn't mean it doesn't violate the Constitution.
Yes.
So the Constitution is it. That's it. And to go even further, if you already have an active military force, people join the military. I know now it's, you have college benefits and things like that. There's other reasons why people go, but you're the war fighting unit for the country. Okay.
Yeah.
The National Guard is not. So if you can't get people to join the military to fight for the country, and you have an enormous drop in your enrollment in all branches of the military, maybe you should look into why. Are we fighting useful stuff that defends freedom? No, we're not.
Right.
We're toppling other regimes other parts of the world. Like, so you're signing up to get college paid for, and you might go get blown up in the Middle East so that some oil tycoon can make money and pump stuff on a pipeline into Europe. Like, so the reason why we're not fighting against any national forces where our freedom and our country is on the line, because I do think that if something arrived at our doorstep, plenty of people will go sign up. Plenty of people will join militias. Plenty of people will fight for the country they live in, but they're not right now. We're fighting in other places. And that stuff's not coming over here. We have oceans. We are so protected by natural resources that to try to invade us is a complete, like, it's just not happening. And other parts of the world are not that they don't have that benefit. So people join their militaries because they want to defend their homeland. But the National Guard should not supplement lack of recruiting in the military for the country. They have a recruiting problem. No one wants to join for a lot of reasons. And because in the same way that we talked about the too big to fail banks, this is kind of a similar problem where we have a failed system for lots of real reasons. And instead of addressing why things are failing and not functioning as they should, we fix it with other stuff. And and the National Guard is like going into debt basically in your military. You're depleting other resources because you can't keep your resources up. And I don't agree with that either. So
it's, when you're talking about that and you're talking about just the layering on of like different laws and legislation and stuff like that, and just these it reminds me, and I'm sure you've seen it yourself, but if you ever go into these older homes and you see like 5 layers of paint because somebody didn't want to actually like go through and recondition the wall. So like, I'm just going to throw another piece of, and it's like, you have a layer that's like that thick on the wall by the time it's like, well, there's a reason the wall isn't doing very well anymore, because you kind of just sealed in all the things that made it bad to begin with. And you didn't really fix anything. You just kind of covered up the problem. And so that's kind of what it reminds me of. It's, well, I hate to say it, it's kind of a slumlord mentality if you really think about it, because it's like, we'll just fix it this way and it'll be fine. It'll buff out, but it never does buff out. So now I know that we're coming up. We're right around the 15 minutes. So if you want to bring up some closing points, that would be fantastic. I'd love to hear if there's any other subjects quick, or if there's something you want to kind of close out on. Please.
I just, I kind of spoke in the beginning, the whole purpose of, the way that we met is through the ALC. I appreciate you onboarding with us and coming in and offering all your knowledge, and you got a wealth of knowledge and organizational skills. And, we are trying to grow in the liberty movement. An avenue for that in the political side is the party, but outside the party, you need activism work. Otherwise the party just exists and they run candidates and those candidates fail.
Absolutely.
So, we talked about other stuff like, freedom with morality, which is a huge thing with us and the group as a whole. And that's part of a cohesive that's part of the glue that holds the group together as well. Is we disagree with kind of this unchecked level of hedonism parts of the party want. I think it's a black mark on the party. I don't agree with that stuff. And I would like to see the party move in a good direction, which is the purpose of the ALC in some respects, but there's also the activism side. So If anyone sees this and wants to join, you can hit me up the X account, which is listed under my name at ALC Caucus, at AL Caucus. And man, outside of that, I'm psyched for your podcast. I think it's great you're doing this. I really appreciate you inviting me on as your first guest, and I honestly had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the topics conversation, man, and I think we covered a ton of ground in a couple of hours. And yeah, I think you got a great thing going, man. I wish you a lot of success with this, and I really do hope this goes well. And keep it up, man. You got a lot to talk about, and I really enjoy the conversation. So I would love to see more of these. And I don't have a whole lot to plug, man. It's just the ALC, and you know, I got my own little world of stuff going on. But I genuinely appreciate coming on. I'm psyched that you're doing this. And I hope you stick with it, man. It's a good thing. And any way we can help, man, I'd love to boost it as much as we can and get people on. You're super active with stuff, and you got a lot of grassroots organization, which I think is really key to like making personal connections with people. And so I wish you all the success.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I'm actually pretty humbled. It's been great. Just being able to get to know you and so many of the people at ALC. It's kind of given me a purpose and an area to work in, just from a fundamental like ground level. And I think you know, and I'll even put this out there too. Like I'll shamelessly plug. Definitely, if you're not sure where to go, if you're not sure where you want to get active in or how you can get involved, definitely like check out the American Liberty Caucus. You know, check them out on Twitter and see what's going on. And, you know, it's like, it's for me, what I feel like it is not only is it a way to find like-minded people, but it's a way to link up and actually make a real difference. There's a lot of really smart people that I've found, and people that have different talents, from social media to being able to draw legislation and bills and so many different things. So if you're looking for a home to be able to branch out and do things with, definitely look up the American Liberty Caucus, get involved. And there is a website too, from what I remember, that they
it's AmericanLiberty.info is the website.
Okay.
A lot of information on there. We also have a Discord. So if you send a message to the X account, we can get you in the Discord, which is where all the organizing takes place. Discord, I know it's an app for kids and video game stuff, but actually it's a great organizing tool. Yeah. And we do most of our work in there. So we like to bring people in there. We chat. We have a good environment. We try to keep it as a positive environment. We try to keep we all have our complaints and gripes with the political world, and stuff pops up here and there, depending on what's going on nationally. I am smoking like a factory select smoke from like Cigar International. It's
ooh.
It's a Drew Estate factory smoke, so it's nothing special, but it's cheap and it tastes good, which is all that matters to me.
Hey man, I mean, you definitely got to find the things that you like, and you like what you like. And I'm sure, I have no doubt in my mind that you know, Mark over at Centerline, you know, he's a cigar aficionado. So something tells me he might do a little perusing either tonight or over the weekend. And you know what, Mark? I just want you to be happy, brother. So no, I do appreciate
people that smoke cigars live longer.
Hey, and it raises testosterone, and it makes you more manly. So, you know, there's so many benefits. And also, Gene, I appreciate the kind words. Sean's a great guy, obviously, as you guys have been able to see firsthand. And that's my goal, is to be able to try and bring the best possible content that I can from a very liberty-oriented perspective. I don't want to speak for Sean, but, you know, I think our aim is not necessarily always to convince somebody or to get somebody to agree with us all the time, but to provide a fresh perspective, a good liberty-oriented perspective, to at least get people to think and to consider like what is actually going on. And I would even argue that that's something that the American Liberty Caucus also attempts to do, is we're not trying to always change people's minds or get them to just turn on a dime, but we really want people to be considerate and to think and to really look into things that are issues, especially if they're things that matter to you in your own states. And honestly, it's I again I hope this also applies to people in Europe and so many other places. Like just do everything that you can to foster these movements in your own countries, and to be able to connect with people that are of like minds, because together you really are stronger. It gets a lot harder to persecute people and suppress people when you are together. And that doesn't mean you're going to agree on everything. But if you agree on most things, if you can come together under the realm of liberty, it gives you a better fighting chance, in my opinion. And so that's why I'm very happy to promote and to put forth the American Liberty Caucus, because what they do in the United States, I think, is very important. And that's not just speaking from being a part of it. I really do feel that it's something we need, especially when there's.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. It's been an interesting project to work on, and I'm very optimistic that we can continue pushing forward and grow the right way with the right people. We welcome discourse. We welcome polite discourse. We have our channels for philosophical debates, and I would really think, I think people should enter those spaces with an open mind, and you might learn something, you might disagree, and you know what? It's all right to disagree. We do have a core set of values we try to uphold, and you know, if there's plenty of people that disagree with some of that stuff in there, and that's okay, and they have their reasons. But the whole purpose is to push liberty ideas forward.
Yes.
So whether you are all the way in anarchism, you're constitutionalist, you're a Republican, you're probably an old school Democrat. You know, if you if you want freedom and you love your country and you want to be free and you want to remove this nonsense we're dealing with, and try to make a difference in real life, not just on the internet, please join us. Join the fight, and we accept everybody from all groups, as long as you got good ideas and you want to be productive and you want to do a little bit of work, and we try to take on as many people as we can. So we have a great group. Honestly, I can't stress that enough. We really do, especially in our space. We have a great group.
Absolutely. And you know, I guess I really appreciate you coming on. I actually would love to have you on again. You know, I know you're busy, but we'll figure out a time to have you on. And even if you want to be a consistent contributor, if that's something you feel, I'd love to have you do that too. Because I feel like you bring a really good wealth of knowledge, and you're pretty well read on a lot of different things. And even if there's some things that maybe we both don't know a lot about, it still doesn't negate the fact that we can have discourse and have a meaningful conversation about it. So
yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely.
You know, that being said, I'm just going to wrap up on a couple things here. Again, if you've seen them in the comments, Centerline Systems, you know, I can't express enough the gear. Mark does such a good job, and you know, he really loves and puts a lot of you know, passion into the things that he makes. He's not that far away from me. He's like a half hour away. Made in the United States. He has rugged, rough gear. I have 3 of his belts. I still have the very first belt I bought from him that's still operational from like 10 years ago. And the buckle still works, the gear still works. If you want something that's American made, that's really going to stand up to the test of time, look up Centerline Systems, you know, and purchase some of his gear. I mean, he's a top quality gear maker, in my opinion. And he's a no nonsense guy over at his YouTube channel, and he's on Rumble, and he streams on X as well. You know, so go check out all the content that he has as well. He tries to have very important conversations and meaningful conversations, and he has a great list of guests, notwithstanding yours truly. But I kind of don't, you know, I kind of don't shoe myself in, I guess, so much because I'm doing this right now. But definitely go look at his content, and he's got really good stuff. So I just wanted to put that in there. Sean, thank you so much for not only being here to talk about these conversations, but to be here for the very first episode. Means a lot, man. It really does. I'm just going to go through a couple comments here quick, and then we'll end the show. So, here's one from Gene. Fine words indeed. Good luck, Sean. Hope to see you again. I wholeheartedly agree. I really want Sean to come back.
Thank you. I hope we can make that happen. I do. I had a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. Centerline, Mark. Hey, I appreciate you, man, and I really enjoy being able to contribute to your podcast and in both the gear aspect, but also in the Cialis After Dark. That's what he has on Thursdays, and he has some more gear-centric videos on Mondays. So, and I believe both of those are at 6 or 1800, depending on what you ascribe to. So, really good stuff. Thank you very much for coming by and supporting me, man. Means a lot. And Millstone, thank you, Gene. Millstone is live once a month. That is one of the other things that he does. And there's so many, it's another form of conversation that really fills a good gap. And Mark and Blake do an amazing job with that too. So again, hats off to all those guys that participate in that. John, appreciate it, man. I really do appreciate it. Thank you everybody for coming out. And on that note, John, again, been a pleasure, and we'll wrap it up here. My closing comment here is, look, liberty, it exists within all of us. We have to work together. We have to be unified in our efforts for liberty. We have to get active in our towns and our communities and in our states to really make things happen, because it is incumbent upon us. It is important that we are involved. Rights not exercised are rights that ultimately don't exist. So bear that torch of liberty, carry forth liberty in everything that you do, not only for yourself, but for our posterity. It's so important. And on that note, God bless everybody. Have a great rest of your evening. And I will see you next Saturday at 1700 for the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. Take care.